Hello, and welcome to Arts and Entertainment.
With Chris and Randall.
I'm Chris,
I'm Randall.
and welcome to our show. If you are new to the show, or you are not new to the show, and you haven't taken care of this yet, please like, subscribe, comment, listen, watch, share with your friends. And again, as I said, if you want to comment and you think, hey, we're doing an awesome, amazing job, or you guys suck, or you know what would be a really good episode for a future show? Hey, Randall, what's the best way to contact us?
Probably our Facebook page. That's how everybody likes to contact us now, but you can email us. Check out our website, chrisandrandall.com, for different ways to contact us.
And if you see us on Facebook and you leave a comment on Facebook, we're pretty good at catching those.
Oh, yeah, we'll see it.
We'll see it. We'll see it. And we're on YouTube. And it's so weird. I keep on forgetting that for some of you, you're not watching us. You're listening to us. If you are listening to us, Randall is the handsome one, and I'm the one with the good personality. Hey, Randall, a few weeks back, you came up with a really good idea for an episode, and I really liked it. And we were talking basically about how there was almost a class difference in aesthetic taste these days. And
that was a great episode, I thought.
It was. And it really talked about kind of the divide between what you could call high art and low art, or mass appeal and critical appeal. And it got me to thinking that we only really scratched one half of that surface. Well, I'm mixing metaphors. Because, that was just dealing with it on a socioeconomic issue. And I thought to myself, especially because the name of our show is called Arts and Entertainment, and even I and you are drawing a keen distinction between art and entertainment. So I want to talk today about the relationship in modern American society between what I would call critically acclaimed art and commercially successful art. Let's just define terms for people who don't know what the hell we're talking about, but I think it's pretty simple. A critically acclaimed work of art is the kind of art that critics acclaim, and a commercially successful work of art is the kind that makes a lot of money. That seemed like a pretty clear definition.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like, especially with movies, but almost in all forms of art, there's even at the outset of creation of pieces of works, people have in mind if they're going to make a work for a mass audience to make money, or they're going to make a work to appeal to critics.
Certainly so. Or sometimes it doesn't even matter what the intention of the artist is, as much as who reacts to it strongly. I mean, certainly sometimes the artist might just be making art for art's sake, and they just happen to either command a lot of money and have a large enough following that when they make art for art's sake, they can get commercial success. And sometimes somebody who is just making their own thing for themselves. And I guess in some ways, you're actually, darn, I want to get into this in a bit, but you raise such a great point, which is there is the critically acclaimed artist, and there's a commercially acclaimed artist, and there's their intention, and then there's their audience, which is not so much within their control. And then there's the great arbiter of what is what. And certainly, you can't have critically acclaimed art without a critic. So exactly what do we mean by a critic, Randall? What is the role of the critic?
Well, we just talk about what a critic is. I mean, they are usually reviewing, quote unquote, reviewing works, right? They do movie reviews. Siskel and Ebert were famous movie critics. They usually write about works of art in news media, and they pass judgments, right? I mean, you were telling me this was your idea earlier, where you're telling me art critics, their role essentially is to pass a judgment on works of art, right?
I would definitely say that, and I need to be a little clear. There's the critic, that you see in your like newspaper, and then there's criticism, which is an entire field in journals and magazines and publications. So to be really clear, I'm going to focus more on critic as in reviewer and not criticism as in the theoretician dealing with an overall idea. So the critic is someone whose job it is to define the qualities of a work. I'm just talking about the critics in the most literal sense, whose job it is to pass judgment on new works or works of art, at least as they debut into the wide spectrum. And I feel that almost everybody I've ever met who is a critic has basically come out of Goethe's three questions, which is, this is the most basic understanding of the training of a critic, which is what is the artist trying to do? How well did he do it or she do it? And was it worth doing? And a critic should be trained in the aesthetic rules of a work of art so they can at least say how well this work approximates what we've agreed upon as being the way that art should be done, or how well does it break the rules and what does it find? So the critic, in some senses, is like a detective, an investigator, a judge, but what they're doing is they're bringing their understanding of the art form to that particular work of art, and then they're gauging it qualitatively to other works of art. You could argue that the critic does the thinking for you as an audience member, or when you go to see critically acclaimed work, you're going because your favorite critic liked it, or you want to see if the overall critical consensus is right. A great example of this is the movie Parasite. Did you see the movie Parasite?
Yes, I saw it.
Do you like it?
Oh, yeah. It was a good movie.
All right. I liked it too, but I know that some people who saw it probably were not familiar with what is the name of that filmmaker again?
Who that made Parasite?
Yeah.
I'll look it up.
Okay. Well, anyway, you and I have both seen a number of films by this Korean filmmaker. He's been around for a number of years, but
Bong Joon-ho.
Bong Joon-ho. But unlike, Bong Joon-ho's Memories of Murder, which I saw in a little theater in the East Village with 6 other people, which was good because the theater only held 12. Parasite was playing at the local AMC with, 50 people in the room. So sometimes a critic can really help spread the good word. They become a platform. They become an influencer. Whereas I feel, if you look at the commercial art is just decided by the market, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, in some sense, commercial art, it's a tautology, right? I mean, commercial art is just there to make money, and if it makes money, it's commercial art, right?
Well, but yeah, and commercial art is also, it's funny. On one hand, I could just say that something that is commercially successful is objectively successful, right? Here's a nasty thing you can say, and I'm not saying it's always true, but the only reason why this movie is liked by the critics is because this movie appeals to critics. They used to say that the only reason why Elvis Costello got positive reviews by music critics is because he wore glasses and he was skinny and he looked like a music critic.
I never heard that before. That's funny.
Yeah, they used to say that music critics hated Van Halen because Van Halen looked like the kind of people who would beat up them when they were in high school. And they loved Elvis Costello because they could identify. And in fairness, I would definitely say that, sure, you can absolutely look in literature and in film and theater, you will see a lot of bright, Ivy League educated white men reviewing the works of bright Ivy League educated white men. So, yeah, absolutely speaking, the subjectivity of criticism isn't always good. And certainly, yeah, there's something to be said for the fact that a song is so popular, everyone buys that album, or a movie is so great that everybody buys it, goes to the theater. But if we're honest, commercially successful works also operate from a larger platform. So the deck is stacked. I mean, uh, as successful as even Parasite was, the amount of theaters it opened at, or even at its height, premiered at, is so much. It's like a tenth of, say, Avengers Endgame, right? So, like, I don't know how many screens in America or in the world Avengers Endgame premiered in, but it was X many times more than anything else. So doesn't that also, in a way, its platform being so large, almost ensure that it has a good chance of being commercially successful?
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, it's a lot of commercial work makes money because the distribution company controls the distribution channels, right? I mean, they can
Yeah.
release Avengers Endgame and in 5,000 theaters in the United States or whatever it is, and Parasite. Maybe I don't know who released Parasite, but it's going to be a smaller release. They're not going to put it
500 theaters, right? That would be pretty damn good.
right. Um, if you're a smaller distribution company, you don't really have access to all the screens that Disney has, right?
I mean, in fact, let's pick on Avengers Endgame for a minute, because also there is the ancillary markets, right? Disney Plus will be showing the Avengers Endgame series, right? Walmart, Target will be having millions of copies of the DVD that you can purchase for
Right.
Avengers Endgame,
This is
much more
why
so than Parasite.
this is why the internet and streaming is so interesting from an artistic standpoint, aesthetic standpoint, because yes, in the olden days, see, I remember a long time ago. Now, I think we're getting way off topic now, Chris, but I remember in the olden days, like I used to read film criticism magazines, and the critics would always talk about movies they would see at film festivals, and the critics would offhandedly say in the review, "Oh, well, maybe this movie will get a distributor." It's pretty good.
Well, but actually,
And
you raise a
well, let me
great
finish, Chris.
point.
And it would never get a distributor, and I would never see it. Okay, and now you can see everything. The audience can see everything, and so you go to Netflix. They have all these obscure independent movies. Disney is going to put their more obscure stuff on there. You don't have to wait until the DVD for something is released. I mean, we're in an unusual time now. I mean, maybe critics are becoming nearly obsolete. I don't know, but what do you think?
No, I think you just actually raised the opposite point, which is that if you are, and I'll pick on film for a few moments, it's the power of the festival, right? I mean, if you don't, in the world of independent filmmaking, if you don't get a good festival, and I've known friends who've done this, then you're not going to get picked up. So you live and die on the festival. Whereas if you're Avengers Endgame, that's not the case. Look, Marvel Comics struggled for years to become a blockbuster, but there was never a need for them to enter a film festival. They just needed to have someone put in enough talented people behind the scenes, writers, directors, actors in front of the camera, and money to make a quality, commercially successful film based on, of course, commercially successful intellectual property. So, and I'm not picking on it. I love Avengers Endgame. Please do not think I'm slamming on Avengers Endgame, but it is based on work that was already commercially successful. Comic books had a wide enough distribution outlet. And certainly there's movies that come out that bomb. I mean, certainly, movies that in independent films that never get past the festivals, they're just never seen, so they're obscure. But films that get a lot of promotion, say like Lone Ranger, that came out 2 years ago with Johnny Depp and Armie Hammer, like when they
Right.
bomb, they bomb. So it's definitely a different stage. One of the other things that I think I wanted to talk about as it relates to critically acclaimed artwork, as far as another outlet for it, is academia. I have no idea how many copies of The Great Gatsby are purchased every year at Barnes and Noble or whoever sells books on Amazon for the sheer joy of reading F. Scott Fitzgerald. I hope to God it's a lot, but let's be blunt. The majority of people who read The Great Gatsby are reading The Great Gatsby because their high school teacher or their college professor has put it on the syllabus.
Right. Well, in a certain sense, right, academia is there to help create the canon, to decide which of our works of art are the greatest works of art of our civilization, decide which works of art maybe represent our civilization in a certain way. This is why we've had such fraught conversations of late, right, about the canon, about authors in the canon. It's a discussion about who you want to represent our civilization, right? And they want it, and certain people want it to be more inclusive.
And I would say, like, while the critic is the person who introduces the artwork to the world, and the academics, they're the ones who enshrine it, right? I mean, in fact, I would argue the academics are far more important than even the critics, because once it's enshrined, it's very difficult to remove.
Well, long term, right? Yes, I think you're right.
Because the stakes are raised, right? Like, if the critics just love The Great Gatsby, I may or may not read The Great Gatsby. But if my English teacher is requiring me to read The Great Gatsby, and my ability to understand and grasp it in a critical, analytical manner dictates my academic success in the class, now I'm not just reading for the sheer joy of reading. I'm reading literally for my own academic survival.
Right. I think that the interesting thing about attacks on works like The Great Gatsby, about works that were enshrined earlier in the canon, is that the attacks are upon the identity of the author rather than anything intrinsic to the work, right? He's a dead white male, therefore we shouldn't read it, right? Well, is there something wrong with The Great Gatsby? No one says anything, right?
Well, actually, if anything, I would argue The Great Gatsby, with every year, becomes a more woker book, as if it deals with issues of class and sexism and violence. It's more topical today than it was at any other time in history. You can teach Great Gatsby with queer theory. You can teach it with a leftist Marxist analysis. There are so many ways that you can bring modern structural theory to Gatsby, which might mean Gatsby is going to stay enshrined long after we're dead.
Well, it's because there's a lot of meat to chew on in Gatsby, and in a lot of ways, Fitzgerald is really exploring the American experience with Gatsby, right? And it's relevant even today, maybe even more relevant.
There's a downside too, though, which is that if your first exposure to the work of F. Scott Fitzgerald is A Great Gatsby in a high school English class, where if you don't understand it, you're not going to get a good grade. Once you're out of school, once you're out of your college, wherever, once your education ends, how likely is the average person going to want to read another work of Fitzgerald, much less as an adult reread Great Gatsby just for the sheer joy of reading it?
Well, do you think that's important?
I think it unfortunately causes a backlash. I think, in fairness, because a lot of critically acclaimed art I hate to use this word, is foisted. is foisted upon you at a young age when you can least appreciate it, but you're being told you have no choice but to read this and to find what makes it great, given your own limited life experience, by the way.
Yes, I will say that I was forced to read Gatsby in high school, and it was way over my head. Now that I look at it again as an adult in my mid 40s, I see it as the spectacular work it is, but I really have a hard time understanding why high school kids are forced to read it. I think it's way over the head of most high school kids.
And that's a really good thing. And I talk sometimes to my mom about this, because for a long time she was an elementary school teacher, and I think that one of the problems, I've always felt one of the great problems in school is that they think that critically acclaimed work can just be appreciated by everyone as long as you explain to everybody what's going on, which is not, by the way, what a critic does. I want to be very clear. A critic draws distinctions and finds things and drosses them. But, when you're reading critically acclaimed work in high school, and by the way, I'm going to talk about the difference right now between critically acclaimed work in high school versus critically acclaimed work in college versus critically acclaimed work in grad school. So in high school, it would be very easy to have a syllabus about the Great Depression and the 1920s and the Roaring 20s, and you're just literally teaching Gatsby as a very simplistic understanding of the jazz age, right? We're just going to understand how life was like and how difficult it was to be rich and how difficult it was to be poor. And then you get to college, and in college, in your introductory English class, you're talking about the American dream, right? That's what college professors love. Like, is this an indictment of the American dream? What does Fitzgerald mean by there are no second acts in America? And what does it mean to be a self-created person, right? And then you get into graduate school, and obviously, if you're in graduate school for English, you're going to look at Fitzgerald and his Catholicism and the socioeconomic, psychosexual dynamics that are going on in the book. And if you're in a writing program, you might look at his use of the color green as a reapurging metaphor that gives context and beauty to both nature and cash. But, the more and more you deconstruct the book to fit your critical analysis, I would argue, and I hate to say it, I think the more you get away from the beauty of the book. And I almost also feel like, in fairness, sometimes I feel like a critic can actually pervert the understanding of a great work of art, because it makes you're not looking at the work as the work, you're looking at it as all these things that have been forced upon your head that you need to know in order to appreciate the work.
I think you're right. There's a story, you can Google it, Harlan Ellison's Dune adaptation, or Harlan Ellison, David Lynch's Dune adaptation. Harlan Ellison tells a story about it. He says that they didn't let critics see an advanced version of the movie, right? And that pissed all the critics off. And they didn't let them see an advanced version. I forget, it was some silly reason, I forget now, it wasn't ready, the print wasn't ready or something. Anyway, so when the critics finally see it, they already had their knives out and they were ready to tear it apart. And so Lynch's Dune, I thought it was great. I mean, I think it's like one of the all-time greatest sci-fi movies. But when it comes out, it got horrible reviews. Critics were just all over it for being a horrible movie. And Ellison writes this great essay about how it was just the studio just pissed all the critics off and they just wanted to retaliate. And that those early critical reviews of that movie destroyed the movie. Like, anybody today, like me, who might say it's a good movie, is not going to be taken seriously. Ever.
Then you raise a really good point. I mean, even Gatsby, there's been 3 versions of Gatsby, and they have all gotten terrible reviews. And there is a saying, and I don't remember where I first heard it, but I definitely heard it at least as early as the 1990s, that if you want to great books never make terrible movies, but terrible books make great movies. And all you have to do is look at something like Mario Puzo's The Godfather, which is a very mediocre book. Go try reading it. Or Peter Benchley's Jaws, which is completely different, but Jaws, The Godfather, these are great movies, and
Gone with the Wind probably fits in there.
Gone with the Wind is another one of these.
I mean, Gone with the Wind, the book isn't a horrible book, but it's not like, no one considers it classic literature, I don't think.
No, but they're not, and in fact, that's the thing. So critically acclaimed, and I know we're really leaning into books. I promise we'll get past books in a minute, but books right now are really, it's the thing that all of us kind of really are going to come into contact with, and books and film really is just the easiest distinction to draw into. But that's the thing, is that it is really interesting how the formats. It's almost as if, there probably have been 1 or 2 productions of books or great plays into film, but it's almost as if what makes a film a great film requires that none of its source material be critically acclaimed.
Yeah,
But
I
you
see
almost
that.
have to just like somehow what makes a great work of art in another medium just doesn't often
Well,
travel
one
into the other.
Well, we're getting a little bit off topic, but I think one of the problems with adapting something that's considered a classic, spectacular work is that your adaptation will never live up to the original.
Yeah.
But if you adapt something that's just mediocre, you can improve upon it, and then everybody will love it.
And it's another good point too, because a critically acclaimed work of art getting translated into a commercially acclaimed work of art is almost an anathema, because if you really think about it, and we should have gotten to this way earlier in the discussion, but I believe really should have talked about this right from the top. But I believe that the difference between a commercially acclaimed work of art and a critically acclaimed work of art, as an audience member, not as a critic, not as a box office, but as you, the spectator, is that you have to bring a lot more. You have to be a much more active participant when looking at critically acclaimed art. You have to either bring an analytical skill. You really do. You have to bring an analytical skill. You have to be able to do a little of the work of understanding context, deciphering code, whatever it is. Understanding a symbol, understanding the dynamics subtextually. You can't just kind of sleepwalk through it. You really need to bring something to the work. Whereas commercially successful art, I would argue, really appeals to us on an intuitive level. And I'm not going to say you don't have to think, but any more than I don't think in critically acclaimed art you don't have to feel. But I do feel that a lot of the heavy lifting is done for you in commercially successful art. And I think one of the reasons why we're hitting this problem pretty quickly on is things like Dune, which is a great example. You really have to bring a lot of understanding to Dune, the book, the novels, in order to appreciate it. So when you all of a sudden, I just saw the trailer, by the way, for the latest version. It looks awesome. So who knows?
I can't wait. Dune is one of my all-time favorites.
Maybe they'll finally get it right. Who knows? So when egg on my face then. But it's much harder on a filmmaker to find a way of conveying the heavy lifting of a reader to the easy understanding of a film goer. And we'll probably go into this a bit more, but I mean, that's a good thing to right now just say. I mean, I think that let's look at two filmmakers who I really feel operate in they're both successful. One is critically successful, one is commercially successful. And I honestly feel that they both really illustrate this point very well. James Cameron and Wes Anderson. Let's see, Randall, what's your favorite James Cameron film?
Didn't I already answer this question? I can't remember what I said.
You didn't during the actual interview. This is a pre-interview. Yes, we talked before the show, so we don't just ramble.
I think I just want to say Titanic. Right now I'm just going to say it's Titanic. It's probably the best one.
Titanic, and I would say for me, I like Titanic, but I'm always going to love Aliens.
Oh, Aliens. That's the one I said before, but now I'm Titanic.
Titanic, Aliens, Terminator 1, which is actually, a low-budget film.
By the way, Harlan Ellison sued James Cameron because he claimed James Cameron stole his idea from a short story for Terminator, and he won. Yeah. Just want to say that.
Okay. And I even like True Lies, which I know is not. True Lies is a terrible film. I mean, it's just a god-awful film, and I like it. I've never seen The Abyss. Have you seen The Abyss?
Yes, I've seen The Abyss. You never seen The Abyss?
No. Was that good or bad?
It's funny because it's like, I think it's James Cameron's most artistic movie, even though he spent a lot of money making it, but it's his most it's his least commercially minded movie, I would say.
I would say, and I know that it introduced this particular form of CGI that he's famous for in The Abyss, that you get to see in Terminator 2 and that you get to see throughout the 1990s and early aughts. Just like he is incredibly innovative for 3D animation for Avatar. Avatar, groundbreaking. So, James Cameron is a groundbreaking filmmaker, visually speaking. He uses state-of-the-art technology. He pushes the edge of technology. His films are some of the highest-grossing films of all time. If you're listening to this, there's a very good chance at least one of his films is a movie that you would, if I said, look, there's a big screen, Dolby surround sound, IMAX, everything you like, and you can sit there by yourself. Would you like to see a James Cameron film? You probably go, yes. I mean, he is probably one of the most successful, truly one of the best, I would argue, commercial successes because of the risks he takes, the amount of money he puts in. I'm not saying as a critical success. In fact, I would argue, I think he's rarely ever gotten any positive criticism, has he?
He doesn't get much positive criticism. Well, a lot of his movies, they tend to be retreads. I mean, Aliens is a sequel. Titanic is basically the remake of the old Titanic movie. I think it has the same storyline even. Avatar steals its storyline from Fern Gully, I think people like to say. But, he's not... James Cameron isn't interested in making novel art. He's not interested in pleasing the critics. He's not interested in making art that's innovative in a certain in like a ideological way. He's interested in making art that's innovative aesthetically,
right, aesthetically and entertaining. He is highly entertaining.
He's similar to Lucas in that respect, because Lucas was very obsessed with the visuals of both THX 1138 and Star Wars when he's working on those movies.
So hold that thought, because I want to get to Wes Anderson for a sec. So Wes Anderson, what's your favorite Wes Anderson
Well, Wes
film?
Anderson's like the opposite.
Right.
Rushmore, right? We both agree Rushmore is the best one, right?
Rushmore, Royal Tenenbaums, Moonrise Kingdom. I liked Isle of Dogs.
Isle of Dogs is a great movie. See, Wes Anderson is like the opposite of James Cameron, right? So James Cameron is
low budget.
Well,
right?
James Cameron is obsessed with the way things look, the aesthetics of it, and Wes Anderson's more obsessed with characters and storyline and acting.
Yeah, but you were saying this earlier before the show. You're right. Visually speaking, Grand Budapest Hotel is spectacular.
Yeah, I love the way Grand Budapest Hotel looks. I mean, he did a great job on that.
The stop motion work on Fox and his friends, the fabulous Mr. Fox, and the Isle of Dogs is beautiful. But lo-fi, right? Wes Anderson's whole visual aesthetic is
the striking thing
is on the parallel. It's the parallel opposite of James Cameron, right?
Well, yes, but the striking thing about Wes Anderson movies is just how novel and original the storyline and characters are, right? I mean, they are. Wes Anderson's trying to come up with something novel. He's trying to push the artistic envelope in that respect. I mean, Cameron is content to just recycle a proven plot, recycle proven stereotyped characters, and just build on top of that.
And I will say this much: as financially successful as Cameron has been, is as critically successful as Wes Anderson has been. I mean, both of these people, weirdly enough, Cameron's the one who won the Academy Award and not Wes Anderson. But I think it's only a matter of time for Wes Anderson. I really believe that, in fact, him not winning the Academy Award but saying the LA film critics just prove that there is no, Wes Anderson is truly he's the critic's choice. You know what I'm saying? He is so not mainstream in that, the amount of theaters his films are released in. I don't think he's ever going to make a 3D IMAX film. You're
Maybe.
Right. Visually speaking, too, while I would argue the films of his look great, there are no good action sequences in a Wes Anderson film. Even when he's trying in Isle of Dogs, I don't really think he pulls it off.
Well, he's not interested in that, right?
Well, actually, his best work as that was in Rushmore, where the titular character, the kid in it, who's the star, he takes famous Hollywood blockbusters and he recreates them in a high school setting. so that he takes like Apocalypse Now and he makes like the lowest budget version of Apocalypse Now. And it's hysterical because it's so cheap looking.
Right. Well, Spike Jonze did that a lot in what was it? Be Kind, Rewind, was it?
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, they came after Rushmore. But yeah, that's my point. So he's willing to even make fun of the fact that he doesn't have that. Now, I just want to be really clear. I enjoy a good James Cameron film, and I enjoy a good Wes Anderson film, and I've been bored by both men equally in their lesser works. I'm not saying one is better or worse than the other. I'm just saying that. Well, then what the frick am I saying? I'm just saying they're. Randall, what am I saying here about these two men?
I think you are getting to a point where you're seeing it my way, that there's not much of a difference between the critically acclaimed work and the non-critically acclaimed work.
I'm just saying that I would say that none is not worse or better. They're just completely different. Another example of this is let's look at the novels, though they have both been made into movies. Let's ignore that. Let's look into the novel of Stephen King's The Shining, right? Which is about a man who is a frustrated writer who takes his family to this overlook hotel where he becomes the caretaker. He gets possessed by evil spirits and eventually goes on a killing rampage where he dies. And Metamorphosis, right, about a man named Gregor Samsa who wakes up one day and he's an insect. Both of these books, I mean, if you've read Stephen King's memoir on writing, both of these books are metaphors, right? Mm-hmm. They're horrors. They're phantasmagorias. They're metaphors on a state of being. And yet The Shining is certainly one of the most popular horror novels. And Franz Kafka's Metamorphosis, again, not only is it critically acclaimed, but good luck getting through high school and college without somehow finding that on your reading list.
It's pretty gross. I mean, you read it. You were forced to read that in school?
Several times. By the way, I love both. Don't get me wrong. But their approach is completely different.
Well, how so?
Well, I think that it's very fair to say that Kafka is writing social criticism or social satire. He is taking the concept of a man transformed into an insect to basically explore a psychological state and feeling of insignificance, and he's leading with that. Whereas I feel like the metaphor, because we have to remember King has issues with drugs and alcohol, really probably should have picked Misery because he felt Misery was more about that. But he's also, by making his protagonist a writer in The Shining, he is clearly also writing about himself and his own personal demons and his own edification. And he writes about a writer in Misery, The Dark Half, and a lot of King's work. It's pretty clear King is writing a character that is some element of himself. But I feel that King's first goal is to scare the shit out of you. I think that's the real key difference. I mean, and I want to really be clear about this. It's pretty easy to talk about the work of art being commercially successful because the box offices or the readers have bought the book. And it's very easy to talk about critics. But let's get now into the artist's intent. And I don't think any writer can honestly say, I'm going to write a book and it's going to be a bestseller. I've read his memoir. When he was writing The Shining, he was yet to become the famous Stephen King. He was just a very successful Stephen King. So he certainly could not have known that when he wrote The Shining 45 years ago, that it would be a bestseller made into 3 different movies. I believe they're remaking it again. Plus, there's a spin-off movie and a novel. He had no idea that it would be successful. He just wanted to write the scariest book he could write based on his love of scary novels. And when Kafka is writing, I don't think Kafka is writing for the critics. Kafka is simply writing to explore his own feelings and to share the world his view of society and to
Well,
criticize
right.
society.
Kafka famously wants all his works, a lot of his works, destroyed when he dies, right? And
Yeah,
I don't know if the Metamorphosis was published during his life. I mean, I can't remember now, but
I honestly don't remember either.
it could be
Shame
one of
on
the
us.
works that survived his death accidentally. His friends didn't want to destroy it. So yeah, so Kafka is very much a personal writer, but yeah, King is always he's always writing for us, the audience, isn't he?
Right.
I
And in
mean,
that sense, maybe it's the deal. Maybe that is one of the things that really differentiates the the writer of popular work versus critical work is that more often than not, the writer of, and I don't mean just a writer, I'm so sorry, the artist. It could be a painter, musician, a poet, it doesn't matter. But the creative person behind critically acclaimed art, first and foremost, is probably creating art that speaks to themselves and they want to share with the world how they, with the audience, how they see the world.
yeah,
They're sharing their viewpoint.
yeah, I think you're
I
right. I
don't
mean,
think that's the case about commercial art. I think the point of commercial art is to, and I'm not saying that they're without a viewpoint. That's absurd. But they want to be understood and they want you to get where they're coming from, and they don't want to lose you along the way.
right. Well, there's the type of artist that wants to have an audience. They want to have the largest audience possible. They want to entertain people. They want to make entertainment. And there's a type of artist who doesn't really care about any of that stuff.
Well, let me ask you a personal question. So, when you were at USC, you took creative writing with a very famous, critically acclaimed novelist, T. Congression Boyle. What was it like learning the role of the novelist, the approach to writing from a critically acclaimed artist?
Well, the main thing that I really remember from his classes, just how interested he was in his students. He read everything that we wrote. You know, he had us write comments and criticisms of our classmates' works and the writing workshops, and he read them all. and if he found a criticism he liked on somebody's work, he read it out loud in class. I remember I wrote a very harsh criticism of one of my one of my classmates' stories, and he picked it and read it out loud in class. I felt so bad that he read it out loud. I was like, it was horrible. It was like the worst criticism. I hated this story. It was like the worst criticism I ever wrote. But yeah, he liked it for some reason. He was funny too. He had all sorts of jokes he would put in there. Like I remember Independence Day, you know, the original Independence Day movie had just come out.
Yeah.
And so he had this joke he did a couple times where we would read a short story that was about that was very intimate and touching and emotional, and then he'd say, "Hey, does this story need something like a flying saucer to come and blow up the house they're living in?" Because that's what happens in Independence Day, right? It's like this flying saucer goes and blows up the White House.
Did he have any kind of advice on the craft of writing that he would share with you guys?
You know, so Boyle is definitely not the kind of writer that is trying to write a bestseller, okay? Like if any of his books sold, it's by accident. I mean, he was most interested in helping us find our own voice and seeing what we wanted to express. Yeah, so he's probably like the opposite kind of writer as Stephen King. You could tell. I think you could tell reading like Stephen King. You could tell the guy's trying to sell some books. It does. I am kind of. Sometimes when you take an author like Stephen King or an artist like Stephen King, you wonder, like, what if he did make a more intimate work that was...
Oh, that's a very good point. That's a really
I would
good
be
point.
curious. And, I know that King, he tried publishing some books under a pseudonym for a while.
Yeah, Richard Bachman. So if studying under a critically acclaimed novelist, that's what it's like. I studied sitcom writing under a very smart sitcom writer, a woman named Paula Roth, who had started out as a writer on Laverne and Shirley, which is a very successful show, and she became the showrunner for Perfect Strangers, also a very successful sitcom. And To be really clear, she was well read, she was cultured, she was smart. But when we sat down in her sitcom writing class and we would watch shows, talk about shows, look at scripts, and she would share her knowledge, what we really almost always focused on was working within the confines of a commercial medium where you have a set act structure, you have a set scene structure, you have a limitation on language and content, because at the time I took this class, you were not writing for cable, you were writing for the networks. You had it was much less about being innovative and it was more about writing things that people recognized, but solving the issues or going about trying to solve the issues in a unique and interesting way. So everybody was familiar with the setup, and everyone expected a conclusion, because on a sitcom, everything goes back to normal. But what they're really trying to see is how inventive and creative you can be in that midpoint of the story. Where do you take the stories? And not just that, but it's not about how you can make new characters when you write a sitcom. It's how can you take these established characters from the show, who in fairness are just archetypes of comedy in general, and how can you do new and creative things with them while still working within the confines of who these characters already are, so that you make a show that feels like it was already on the air, but a really good episode. And you don't learn in those classes, you don't stifle your creative voice, but you learn how to put your creative voice in the service of a commercial medium, which I think has to be the opposite of working on a novel.
Yeah, I mean, if the novel is unless you're trying to make a bestseller, but yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, there's very few art forms that are as intimate and as individual as novel writing. The format, any kind of video format, usually is so labor intensive that it precludes a lot of idiosyncratic or individual voices. I mean, James Cameron's approach to movie making, of course it's going to happen. Of course it's going to be the way to go. Of course people are going to be doing that, I mean, people like Wes Anderson they're trying to make something unusual and something more personal. I mean, it's going to be more of a struggle.
Well, I will say that I think what distinguishes both of these men, and we haven't really said it, is that both of these men have a point of view. Both of them have a POV. And the only key, really big difference is that Cameron's POV is to work within traditional commercial expectations and surprise you. And Anderson's POV is to abandon traditional expectations and just present what he finds entertaining and surprise you to the degree that you will come along with him on his idiosyncratic ride. And I think the best way of saying it is it's the difference between finding the complexity in the simple and taking complex things and making them simple enough for everyone to understand. And I think, let's go on to the money, right? Because both of these things are fueled by money, right? And what is really the difference and why between the people who support commercially successful work versus the people who provide the money and the outlay for what will be critically acclaimed work?
Well, we got into this in our pre-discussion about how a lot of things that are critically acclaimed, a lot of works that are critically acclaimed, they're not going to make money. So people support them for the social for prestige, right? So that they are, for social status, right? It's like
like if you're a philanthropist, you're giving money to an art museum or to an artist or to a grant for a writer to take time off and work on his novel, or a ballet composer to choreograph her work. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so like a prestigious theater will have a wall of donors' names, right? You walk in the theater, there's a wall of donors' names up there, and what are they doing? They're doing that because the theater's never going to make money
Right.
because they're
The
going to
prestige
make
of losing money at this theater.
they're going to make work that I don't know, can't make money. I don't know.
Yeah, this play was sponsored by a generous donation from Chris Corbell, who will make no money off of this work of art, but just wants you to know he's a supporter of the arts.
Right.
I'm not even joking. My mom loves to tell this story because she was friends with Clyde Barnes, and Clyde Barnes and Joe Papp went to Peggy Guggenheim's house, and she's the one who's responsible for funding. Was it Peggy? It was one of the Guggenheims. I apologize. Very wealthy. And there was when they were starting out the public theater and said, we want to give you the opportunity to, we think they presented it as somehow she was being considered for this exclusive opportunity to donate money to their cause, as if they were affording her, she kicked them out. So that is really, though, what you're talking about.
Well, that's what she's getting. She's getting prestige in return.
And critically acclaimed art is that if you're lucky, we'll let you put your name on our thing. We will let you name this theater hall after you, but only if we really consider you to be worthy. Which is hysterical, because if you ever go to some of these art museums, you will see some of the most guys who would end up going to jail for financial scams, companies that would go out of business for financial scams. Klaus von Bülow, his name still exists. It can be seen every time you walk inside the Museum of Metropolitan Art. A man who put his wife in a coma. But I'm getting a little too far afield. Whereas, when you're funding what will be hopefully commercially successful, you're looking at your ROI. You're looking at your return on your investment. Well, Disney cannot exist unless they make money off of their incredibly expensive blockbusters. Most studios, certainly. Disney at least has amusement parks, but, at least pre-COVID, right? You couldn't even make an art film if you were a film company unless you had a couple of blockbusters under your belt.
Right. So somebody like Wes Anderson, the studio that funds Wes Anderson. Now, Wes Anderson's movies might not lose money. They might make a little bit of money. But when Wes Anderson goes on to get critical acclaim for the movie and wins awards, perhaps, the people of the studio get to bask in that prestige, right? And they get to say, oh, we helped make this Wes Anderson movie. And they get social standing because of that. They can go to Hollywood dinner parties and say, yeah, I was the executive producer of this Wes Anderson movie.
Yeah, and whereas in commercially successful art, it's almost like starting your own business. There's a lot of, I once remember reading an interview with a commercial screenwriter where he said it's like writing an investment portfolio, a stock proposal for a company when you write a screenplay, because what you're writing is the blueprint for something that's going to be a high-risk investment of a lot of money in the hope that they can make an even greater return on their investment. And if they fail to do so, they will lose their jobs, possibly. Rarely can a film executive or even a film company afford to have that many losses. And not only do they lose money, but often they are, by guilt by association, film careers for even actors, writers, directors are destroyed because of bombs. So the stakes are pretty damn high in trying to make a commercially successful film.
I want to bring up another
record.
I want to bring up another example. A good example of what we're talking about is the studio Miramax, founded by Harvey Weinstein. Harvey Weinstein was a master at making Oscar bait movies and movies that the critics loved. But his movies were losing money all over the place. So some studio had to step in and buy Miramax so that it could continue to exist. And I think that was Disney, right?
It was Disney, yeah.
and so Disney to this day owns Miramax. And if I remember right, and they only bought it because of the prestige that it affords them, right? Because Disney, a huge commercial conglomerate that makes the Marvel movies now, makes the Star Wars movies now, But what eludes Disney is the critical acclaim, right? The Oscar movies, right? And so they buy Miramax. It gives them that.
And while it's true that it's a lot of money that funds both the fine arts and the commercial arts, albeit with very different agendas, let's talk about the actual person who attends. What is it that we expect, when you buy a ticket to see U2 uh, at Madison Square Garden or the Staples Center versus when you buy a ticket to go to an opera here at the Dorothy Chandler or the Metropolitan Opera House in New York. What is the agreement? What is it that you're doing, and why are you doing it, right? It's completely different, right? If I'm spending $500 for really good seats at a U2 concert, I really know that, look, Bono's a wealthy man. He doesn't need my $500, but I'm going to get as much Bono as I can afford. Now, if I wanted to go to, say, the opera here in LA and go to the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion and see LA Opera and I spend $500, true, I could certainly make that same claim that I'm trying to get as close to this great soprano or tenor as I can and hear them. But I can also say that that money I'm putting into that theater is also helping support the arts, right? It's a completely different kind of experience.
Right. The patron, the audience goer, going to a critically acclaimed work, they're trying to get the same kind of prestige that the backers got, right? You're going to the opera to get some prestige of going to the opera, right?
Well, I'm not saying that you are only going for the prestige, because that's would make you very super. But it's certainly a side benefit. It's a side benefit, no doubt, from it, right? It's definitely a side benefit.
Well, you're not going to brag that you saw the latest Michael Bay movie, but you may brag that you saw the latest Wes Anderson movie, right?
Right, but that's certainly true. But also, there's an agreement that when you're going to see Bono sing in front of your face, and I've seen him, he's a great live performer, go see him. You're expecting Bono to entertain the fuck out of you. You're expecting Bono to be 100% at it, and he does not disappoint. I will say, Bono, U2 in real life is like watching U2 on a video or listening to their album, but only better. It's 100% satisfaction guaranteed. It's wonderful. Probably it's the same thing to see the Rolling Stones. But he is working for your entertainment dollar. Whereas you will be a lot more forgiving when you go to the opera if you find that maybe the soprano is okay, but not great. The orchestra is fine, but it can be a little uneven. It doesn't need to be or it might even require you to pay a bit more attention, but you're still there. I've seen a pretty okay adaptation of the Ring Cycle that on some level aesthetically was a little too science fictional for my tastes. And some of the singers were good, but not great. And it was just, I would give it a B to B plus, depending on which version of which opera they were doing. But do I regret having spent literally an entire year attending these plays that make up the cycle? No, of course not, because it's so rare to go to the Ring Cycle. It's so rare to hear Wagner's music. It's so rare to see a very okay production of Wagner that I will be much more forgiving of Wagner, of an adaptation, of a production of the Ring Cycle, because it's just harder to get, and because it's harder to do right. Whereas pop music is not that hard to get, and it's not that hard to do right. Now, I'm not saying you can't be a talented pop musician. I'm just saying that working within the forms of popular music is not as challenging as working in the forms of classical music. So I'm going to bring a little bit more of a responsibility to me. And I think the best example of this is, let's compare the experience of going to Disneyland with the experience of going to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Right? I mean, these are both, one is one of the greatest commercial successes as an experience. The other one is a great critical success experience, right? See the great works of art or ride the great rides of amusement parks. You've been to both, right?
Well, yes. The interesting thing about it is you go to a great art museum or you go to a Disneyland, a Disney park, they're both filled with art, aren't they? And so they're a similar experience.
Well, but it's different, because the art in Disneyland is decorative. It's in service of the ride. It's in service of the theme. The art in a museum isn't really so much decorative. It's in service of the vision of the artist. So they're really playing for two, like Wes Anderson and James Cameron. They have two separate agendas.
Oh, yeah,
But
maybe. I
but
mean,
where you're going, what's the agreement when you're going to Disneyland, right? I'm sorry to say this. I feel like when you're going on Pirates of the Caribbean, I love Pirates of the Caribbean. If you get a chance, go. It's a passive experience. You're sitting down. You're going through this pirate world with animatronics and designs that's three-dimensional. It's beautiful. It's lovely. It's very creative. But everything is being given to you to experience on a very visceral level. And it's doing all the heavy lifting for you. Do you like the Pirates of the Caribbean? Is that a ride you've been on that you enjoy?
yeah, I've always loved it since I was a kid. Yes.
Since you were a kid, right? It's the perfect one for a kid, right? Because it knows you better than it knows yourself, right? It knows how to scare you, right? I mean, when you see Davy Jones's ghost, right, coming at you, or when you see the cannon firing another ship.
Well, it wasn't that scary when I was a kid.
Okay, fair enough. But you know what I'm saying? It's enthralling on a very base and primordial level.
Well, I feel. I mean, see, I grew up in Southern California, uh, and I went to Disneyland a lot, and part of the fun of Disneyland was always just the visual part of it, the artworks. I mean, Pirates of the Caribbean is mostly just filled with art. It's you look at the work, you enjoy the aesthetics of it. Yeah, they're creating a world. It's you can look at a ride at Disneyland, like Pirates of the Caribbean is a good example, as like just a giant installation, which is a form of art that they do at museums, right? I think what the interesting division that I think you make, Chris, is that you say that there is a stark division between the art at a place like Disneyland and the art at a place like the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And the stark difference is you need some sort of education or information to be able to enjoy the work at a museum, whereas at Disneyland you don't need to know anything. You can be completely ignorant because because the art at Disneyland is intuitive. It hits you on a gut level. It's based on human biology somewhat, to a certain extent, and then the Metropolitan Museum of Art is totally different. It's like some sort of intellectual. Only people who have been educated in a certain way in a certain culture can enjoy that kind of art. I don't know if this is true.
Congratulations!
Though.
I waited as long as possible not to interrupt you, but no, that's not what I mean. Not at all. In fact, art doesn't work. Fine art. I am the son of a fine artist. Art does not work for most human beings unless we can relate to it on a gut and visceral level. The key difference between making a really interesting looking, scary Jack Sparrow and a Mark Rothko color line isn't the education, is not just that. It's literally how it rests upon you. Mark Rothko puts 3 lines of colors, or William Blake, I'll be better, because William Blake depicts ocean sequences. Sorry, did I say Blake? I meant, well, Blake or Turner, doesn't matter. Turner or Blake, they have an ocean sequence of British ships, just like Pirates of the Caribbean. But the difference is it hits you viscerally. You see a ship, you see it in the water, you're seeing it as a painting, or you're seeing it as a sculpture, or you're really seeing it in a way that isn't trying to do more than just be what it is, because the artist is trying to make it that way. Whereas commercial illustrative art is always in the service of something else. It's like, this is what you think about when you look at the movie. This is what you think about when you think of the animation. It's not bad or good. And if you can't have a visceral experience in fine arts, then you're a very poor human being. Because long before there were universities, long before there were critics, there were always artists making art.
I guess.
Anyway, I'm sorry. That's what I'm trying to say.
I just have a question.
You're going to feel something on I think the agreement when you go to Disneyland as a ticket buyer is you're going to be enthralled and excited. And I think the agreement when you're buying a ticket to go to an art museum is you're agreeing to have at least one piece of work at that museum touch your soul. Touch your soul. Hit you in a way that you can't explain, you don't understand, but on some very base non-intellectual level, this work speaks to you in a way that is so profound that it almost feels, I'm not going to use religion in the Judeo-Christian sense, but like religion, that is an element of the divine that you cannot, that you know is special and unique, and like magic has been created by this one particular artist and not a legion of technicians working in a factory trying to make the perfect Jack Sparrow.
Well, you don't think people, especially children, have that experience at like a Disney park?
I actually don't know if children can distinguish between the aesthetic of beauty of going to an art museum and the aesthetic beauty of going to Disneyland. And maybe there's something really lovely and innocent about that. But as a mature adult who's lived in the world, you should be able to distinguish what makes Disneyland a very beautiful experience, even aesthetically, with its great detail. And it's great. It's quite lovely. I've literally taken photos of every lighting fixture in Disneyland. So I'm a total Disneyland Imagineering geek. But it's a different kind of beauty than the beauty that you will find in a fine art museum. It's a different kind of experience. Not better, not worse, just
all right,
different.
I had a question for you. You said that commercial art is in the service of something else. What is that something else?
Whatever the thing it's trying to sell, whatever that is, whatever the story it's trying to sell, whatever is going to get you to like it, to be appealing. Really, in that sense, commercial art goes out of its way to be appealing, to draw you in for the sake of getting as many people to like and identify as possible. Whereas there is a bit of commentary, I think, in fine art, where it's really a much more personal statement about what the artist is trying to say or express about reality or what's in their mind or in their heart or poetry or whatever it is that is unique to them and what a critic can then pick up upon versus what you, the audience, can. And I do also believe there's crossover too. Like, for example, Charles Dickens wrote these great books in magazines, like A Tale of Two Cities came out, in these periodicals, and they're designed literally so that you'll buy the next issue. He was a very successful commercial artist, but now today we consider Tale of Two Cities a great work of critical art. So it's not like just something. Sometimes we'll take something that's commercially successful and decide that it's more resonant than we think, that even though Dickens is writing to entertain, he's also writing to depict his feelings about socioeconomic disparity or relationships and parents and childhood. It's not so cut and dry. Does that make sense with Dickens? Do you like Dickens?
Yes. I mean, well, you say it's not so cut and dried. I mean, I totally agree with that sentiment.
Or you look at like Death of a Salesman, right? Critically successful play, but like every high school in America, right? Good luck going through, again, high school in America or college in America without sitting through at least some production of Death of a Salesman. And most people like Death of a Salesman. Have you ever seen a production of Death of a Salesman?
No, I haven't.
Well, have you ever? Oh, go give it a shot. I think you'll like it. I mean, it deals with things.
It's on my list. It's on my list.
It's called an American tragedy, and it deals with things that are very. You don't need to know a lot about a lot to get into the play. If you want to, you can. There's a lot going on subtextually in the production. I've studied it in college and in grad school, and there is so much going on in A Death of a Salesman, but none of it is necessary to enjoy what is a very basic human tragedy. Look at Citizen Kane. When it came out, it was a commercial failure, a bomb. Now, in fairness, it's possible it was not allowed to be a critical success because it was an indictment of William Randolph Hearst, and critics weren't allowed to write anything good about it, or Hearst because, A, he controlled a lot of the newspapers, and what newspapers he did not control. He controlled movie theaters, so he would pull his ads out if they gave it a good review. But that was a movie that was a bomb when it came out in the 40s, and it wasn't until the late 50s and the French Cacheurs du Cinéma, did I say that right?
I have no idea.
Anyway, these Frenchmen who said, oh, this is a work of genius. And now Citizen Kane is on the AFI's top, it's normally considered either in the top 5 films. Again, if you ever take a film class in high school or college, you're going to run into Citizen Kane. I mean, you've seen Citizen
another
Kane.
good example. Well, another good example of a commercial failure but a critical success is the top movie in the IMDb, which
What?
is Shawshank Redemption. Right
Oh,
when it
yeah.
came out, everybody loved it. Everybody said all the critics loved it. It did. I don't think it got any Oscars for anything because like it was such a flop. And then here it is, years later, top of the IMDb, and hasn't been unseated ever.
Right.
And
So there you
everybody's
go.
shocked by it. Everybody's shocked by it.
That's another modern example of that. And just also, and I didn't know this, I did some research for the show. But there was a book that came out that was written as an appeal to fine art. It was considered, the author's intention was to try to say something meaningful about the church and Renaissance art and really write something that was very deep and profound. And it got lambasted by the critics. It even got lambasted by Salman Rushdie, a man who wrote the Satanic Verses, and Philip Pullman, who wrote this whole anti-religious series called oh darn it, you know what I'm talking about.
Left Behind?
No. The one who does the children like this book.
I don't know.
Oh, man. Anyway, I apologize. Well, anyway, people who've written about God and religion didn't even like it, and that was the Da Vinci Code. Oh, His Dark Materials. That's what he wrote, His Dark Materials. Anyway, the Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown. It got nothing but just terrible, terrible, terrible reviews from book critics. Turns out to become a giant bestseller. I even remember they put out like a $50 annotated version of the Da Vinci Code, which had prints of all the artworks that it depicted. Everybody was reading the Da Vinci Code. Remember that?
Yeah, Da Vinci Code was huge. It was huge.
You could, and then Ron Howard made a movie out of it, which also got, by the way, universally panned. It has a 26% by Rotten Tomatoes score, and that thing made $760 million at the box office and spurred, I think, 2 more Da Vinci Code films, like the books.
That's a great example of something that's kind of like so outside of what we're talking about, because the author is really trying to make something that's that is supposed to be a critical success, right? He's trying to make something high-minded and intellectual.
Very much so.
Something for the critics, and it's the masses that like it instead.
Exactly. It's exactly right. And I know that it was the same idea behind A Love Story. Eric Siegel was a classics professor. He was just at Harvard. He was just trying to show that he could take the structure of Greek classic tragedy and adapt it into a work of art. And he thought this would be this great cerebral thing. It becomes a pop bestseller. Never planned to be a romance writer in his life. He's a professor of classics at Harvard. This is nothing he intended to do. So it and backfire you. And I think when you get down to it, I think that, I don't like to be so damn America-centric, but in America, I think we really believe a lot in the meeting of the middle. I think that we try very hard to find middle ground. And I think that's why so much of what you see in America is middle-brow art that incorporates both critically acclaimed elements and mass appeal elements. And like what I'm thinking of here by example is, say, Catcher in the Rye. You've read Catcher in the Rye.
Yes, I've read it.
And it's, again, you hit it in high school normally. But Catcher in the Rye is a book that people will read not just because they've been forced to read it. Often they'll read it before they read it in high school. They'll read it as a 13-year-old because it's just a fun read, isn't it?
Yeah, I read it in my 20s, so I liked it a lot.
But on your own, right?
Yes.
No one forced you, and it's a fun read, and it works on both levels. I think of the artwork of Andy Warhol, right? People love his art, both critics and people who just think it's cool looking. The Beatles, right? I mean, critics are always writing about the Beatles and rightfully so, musicology, about what they did, the tonalities, all of that stuff. But also people love to listen to the Beatles and buy their albums. The 1995 film Forrest Gump, right? Critically acclaimed, commercially successful. Steven Spielberg, I think, is really the answer to the whole Wes Anderson, James Cameron divide, because Steven Spielberg makes both action films and he also makes critically acclaimed film. In 1993, he released both the most financially highest grossing film of that year and the most Oscar-nominated film of that year. Schindler's List and Jurassic Park. I mean, what do you think of Steven Spielberg?
Spielberg is interesting to me because he does seem to have a real sense of if something is going to be commercial work or a critically acclaimed work. I mean, he seems to know his audience really well. I mean, he makes Schindler's List knowing that it's going to be critically acclaimed. He makes Jaws knowing that it's going to be a blockbuster. He makes he has some flops, but his flops he totally understands what direction he's going, what kind of audience he's trying to reach. I mean, Wes Anderson, you watch a Wes Anderson movie, it's hard to know what Wes Anderson's thinking, like who he thinks he's making this movie for. But, that's a lot of great works are like that. I mean, Catcher in the Rye, I think, is like that.
But you're definitely saying what I think with Spielberg is really worth pointing out. He will bring in a Tony Kirshner, who wrote Angels in America, a critically acclaimed playwright. He'll bring in Steve Zillian, who is a very commercially successful screenwriter who's written a number of hits. And he has a real good sense of how to make works that appeal to everybody, and he knows how to make works that are limited in their appeal. My favorite Steven Spielberg films, by the way, are all his commercial failures. I love AI. I love Empire of the Sun. I think those are two of his best works. I don't love 1941, but I am fascinated by 1941. And I have to admit, whenever Steven Spielberg, I even like Armstrong. I think whenever Spielberg makes a film that is not even remotely commercially successful, even if that was his intention, but he fails, I think it's because there's a darkness. A lot of his stories are about abandoned children looking for their fathers, especially AI and Empire of the Sun. And I think if he had never made a single critically successful film after Close Encounters, and he just made these dark personal films, I think we would just give him credit as being a really good critical filmmaker. And I think if he had never made any of those films, but just the blockbusters, he would have ended up being the Cameron of even better than Cameron, right? Because he pushes action films in a level that even Cameron can't touch. I mean, you look at Close Encounters, you look at Raiders, you look at Jaws. Those are some of the most significant action films ever made.
What comes to mind for me is Roger Corman, who attempts to make a commercially successful movie with every movie he makes, except for once. And I forget the name of that movie. It's the William Shatner movie.
I've never seen any of his films. To me, he is neither critically acclaimed or commercially successful.
Well, he claims to be commercially successful with every movie, except for I think it's The Intruder.
Well, he might have been profitable, but I don't think he's commercially successful. Which is a whole other thing we can talk about in a future episode. But go on.
But anyway, yeah. So Corman makes this movie. It's a social commentary movie. It stars William Shatner. It takes place in the '60s. It's about the civil rights movement. It makes an interesting point about the movement. And then the movie is a critical success. Okay, it makes Corman thought it would be a commercial success, but it was a critical success. It got a lot of great reviews, and then it totally flopped in the box office. And then Corman said in interviews after that experience, he just said, forget it. I'm never making another critical success. Every movie I'm going to make from now on is going to make money. The end.
Well, and that is really interesting because I never realized that he made a critical success before.
Yes. Yeah, you should watch it. It's a good movie. But after that, all his movies are very genre. They're very, there's a lot of action, They're not the kind of movies that the critics are going to like. So there you go. I mean,
and certainly a lot of the people who worked under Corman would go on to become great critical successes. Ron Howard, Martin Scorsese. There's a number of other people. I'm forgetting Jonathan Demme, John Sayles. In fact, weirdly enough, I will say this much. As a mentor of people who could make critically successful films or commercially successful films. His legacy is right up there with some of our finest film schools.
Well, Corman, the thing about Corman is he's like Spielberg. He really understands the audience, and he knows what the audience wants. And he tried to make a movie early on that he wanted, but the audience didn't want that. And that's it. I mean, it's an interesting quality that that a lot of the most successful commercial artists have. And we already talked about Stephen King. I mean, almost every Stephen King work, I feel, whenever I watch it in movie form or read it, I mean, he's really trying to hook you, the audience. He's trying to hook the mass audience, trying to reel them in, make a real crowd pleaser, as P.T. Barnum might have said. And he knows what he's doing. You don't get that sense with a lot of other artists. There's a lot of artists who they either don't care about the audience or they don't really have a sense of what the audience wants. And so they're making misfires.
I want to be very clear about this. I don't think critical successful work is made to spite an audience. I don't think that's what you mean either. And I read King's memoir, and it's very clear that he works as hard as any other novelist to write the best quality of fiction he can write. It just happens. And this is interesting. I remember when I first started out as a playwright, I wrote a farce. It was very funny. It was a night of 3 one-act plays, and mine was the first. It was one of the 3 plays, and the other 2 were dramas. And they were interesting. They were very well written dramas. And some people liked them and some people didn't. And I wrote a very broad-paced comedy where a man's pants come off and you see his colorful boxers. And it was the mass appeal success. The others were more critical successes. And it is weird because I don't think it's very rare that I think an artist is deliberately going to write something that they think is going to be a commercial success or a critical success. And sometimes I think it's wherever their voice hits, I think as an artist, sometimes you're just going to read a tribe of people who are more critical minded, and you're going to read a tribe of people who are more just entertainment minded. And I mean, that's the beauty of our show, is we're really here to try to cover both elements. Randall, if a genie could grant you one wish, would you be a commercially successful artist or would you be a critically acclaimed artist?
That's a good question, isn't it? I think I would be a critically acclaimed artist just because it seems more interesting to me. You make more interesting work, more original work.
I'd be a commercially successful artist because I really want a much bigger pool and a much bigger house. And at the end of the day,
but you don't have a pool.
I do have a pool.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
I do. I just don't care what history will make of me. I just want to have a good life full of commercial goods. So that said, I'd like to know, hey, listeners, first off, this is a super long episode. What do you think? Like, are you a cultural snob? Are you a populist? Do you think there's an argument to be made for good art, bad art, critically acclaimed art, successful art? What did you think? Do you agree? Do you disagree? I promise you this. Anybody who has any opinion, who comments, we will read your letter, unless you tell us not to. We will answer your question, and we'll give it the attention it needs, because at the end of the day, your input controls the kind of show we're doing, and then without it, we're just going to make up more episodes like this. Until then, I'm Chris Corbell.
I'm Randall.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.